Hello, and welcome to another episode of Code and Pixels podcast. I'm Kelly Harrop.
And my name is Adekunle Oduye.
Hey, Adekunle, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good, I'm on this keto diet. I'm missing carbs. I'm trying to be lean for the summer. That's the price you got to pay. But how are you doing?
That's, that's rough for Valentine's Day.
Oh yeah, I actually skipped it for Valentine's Day. I'm gonna start fresh tomorrow.
Nice. Yeah, I did that for January. I did keto January. It was rough. I told my coworkers, like, please bear with me if I seem extra grumpy. It's not you, it's the lack of sugar and bread in my life. So anyway, today on this episode, we're going to be talking about the typical day for a UX engineer, whatever that means, some of the challenges we face, and wrapping up with talk about career growth. And let's start with the typical day. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on where you fit within the organization. Most of my experience has been revolved around being embedded into like a squad. One example I had was where one squad was like they didn't have enough engineers to work on. I think it was like a navigation. So I was able to step away from design systems, kind of work within the team, and I use it for three different things. I was helping engineers build stuff, and this shows how valuable like UX engineer as a practice because we're able to hop and do different things. Second was that I was able to teach how the engineers that were on the squad how to use the design system because at that time we didn't have a proper onboarding experience. We did, but sometimes you'll release stuff and people don't know what's the newest thing. When I was there, I was able to say, hey, you should use this versus that, all this kind of stuff. And then the third thing was that I was doing some sort of like usability testing for the design system because I wanted to get some feedback. So I asked the engineers right after like my pilot was done that hey, like what's your experience using the design system? What worked best? What was like problematic and whatever like that. But yeah, I think that was one of the ways you can work as a UX engineer is that you're embedded on the squad for a short period of time. I'd probably say around 3 to 6 months. But yeah, I see that was definitely fulfilling overall. So
Yeah, what resonated with me is when you're talking about like using the components and the latest and greatest, how we let folks know, hey, this is available. Do you have any stories about rolling out comms or letting folks know, hey, this is the new hotness, go check it out?
yeah, I have many. So the first thing I want to communicate is that, especially when you work on design systems, you feel like anytime you have a new component and then you have a digest and like, hey, we got this new component over like that. Most often, not like product engineers, designers. Then they're probably going to miss it because again, they have their own problems to focus on. So that's the one thing I realized. It was like we even if you hit them on Slack, email, like they might not know what's like the latest and greatest. I feel like doing some sort of like hands-on workshop approach would be like super beneficial. And in this case, it was more in a case of oh, I'm gonna help them build something using the latest and greatest things, and that kind of does two things. It first lets people know hey, there's new things in the design system, but they can see how to actually use it in a more effective way. And I realized that like there's a mindset between working on like design systems versus on working on product where work on design systems there's like more structure to how things are being built out, but in like more like product engineer there is structure, but I would say that it's more in a case of getting stuff done because you have deadlines and whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you talked about workshops. I think those are great ways to get people more involved 'cause it's more hands-on. You're not having people sit there and read like a 1,000 word essay on how something works. They actually get to see it and play around with it. One of the things that I've noticed in at least in the past few years is that more people are interested in things that aren't necessarily in their own discipline. And what I mean by that is before I would have a dev workshop or I'd have a design workshop. And honestly, there are pros and cons to that. You get more like specialized focus on certain things. But then I felt like I was repeating myself in both sessions for a lot of the content, especially the impact from what I was trying to showcase. And so I think there's room in the future to have more hybrid workshops where you have a mixed set of audience skill sets, developers and designers learning how this component works. Yes, there will be some dev setup. Yes, there's some design context, but I think just having a more consolidated experience for onboarding, I think helps so that we're all on the same page and nothing gets lost.
Oh yeah, interesting. And how did do you have any stories around that? Because I realize that it's very tough to have an onboarding experience that's consistent between design and
Mhm.
engineering. I'm just curious if you came to across anything.
Yeah, I recently gave a design tokens presentation over our team's journey over the past 2 years. And this audience was primarily design, but there were a few engineers there as well. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone was brought along and felt included in what we had worked on. So instead of framing it as, oh, this is project one, project two, project three, I framed it more as narrative. I framed it as, what does the design experience look like today with design tokens? What does the developer experience look like? What does it look like to use tokens? What does it look like to contribute towards tokens? And so once I had those stories planned out, it was a lot easier to figure out how to limit all the details in my head because I tend to just go in and I want to write the 1,000 word essay. I want to say everything that I know about a topic, but gotten feedback that's not the greatest way to entice and excite people about what we do in design systems. So focusing it more on the personas and what it looks like today. No extra fluff, no extra slides. Show people what it looks like open VS Code, open Figma, show how it's working. And I thought that was more powerful because it's easy to just say, "Oh, I'm just going to create a deck. I'm just going to create a deck with some bullet points," which it's great for a follow-up. Like I did have a presentation with some bullet points, but that wasn't the focus of the presentation. So I would say more hands-on presentations, more workshops with both design and engineering can help make people feel like they're part of something bigger than just their own part of the project.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I actually try to avoid slides as much as possible because a like I'm lazy, so I don't want to like create slides. And then B, I feel like to your point, it tells a story if you're more showcasing. And I always try to. I think always best is like when you have like examples. So oh, this is like an example. This is how it's gonna work in the design experience, and this is how it's gonna work in the developer experience. So it has that story because again, I think with slides, sometimes it's things get lost in translation, and sometimes people are like, "Oh, it's super easy. I just have to do this and that," but it might not be as super clear. Another thing I've seen people do is that they actually record some sessions, so it's a FAQ. Like they can be like, "Oh, like how would I use the design system from the design perspective?" And they have a whole like video series and whatnot. And I was like, nice, but that might take so long to do. But yeah, that I like that idea of being story driven and whatnot.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned videos. I just recorded using Loom. Loom's great, by the way. Not sponsored by them yet, but it was pretty great. I recorded a session on how to use Figma for non-designers. And I didn't realize that a lot of people who aren't in Figma all day, it comes off as a little intimidating. Like you don't know where to go, you don't know what to click on, you don't know how Figma works if you're not a designer. And even if you are a designer, there's a lot to know about using Figma. So I just created like a 4 minute crash course in where to click, where to find things, how the inspect tool works. And I think I definitely agree with that. I think we need more videos, more things that people can watch and listen to in their on their own time.
Yeah, I agree. I think having more videos makes it more approachable because even for me, I learn more from videos than actually reading. If I had to choose between a 15-minute video and like a long page of documentation, I'm gonna choose a video all the time. For people that like are, I feel like it's also more accessible too because like sometimes people are like more visual learners, but I think overall, yeah, plus one for videos. So.
Do you have any tips and tricks for what you consider when you're looking at videos or creating videos?
Yeah, so for me, I always start like with words first. So I like to do like a word vomit on a page, and it's like, all right, this is all the things I want to like cover, and then if there's specific sections that are like too wordy and I can't condense further, then I'll just replace it with a video. I feel like that's the best approach because, again, let's say you want to do a mixture of both. You can do where it's like, all right, this is the documentation, and then if you want to dive in deeper to this, there's like a video. And I think a video is always good because it again it's accessible, but then sometimes when you have to change it, you can swap things in out because I know like tools and things are always constantly changing. It makes it easier to demonstrate how to use it in context of a specific tool. But that would be my approach, and I learned that from like when I was working with like a content person when I was on design systems.
Yeah, it's smart doing an outline. I wish I had followed that advice. I think I rehearsed how to say my name about 20 times when trying to make this recording, and each time I said a little bit different. And like this podcast, practice makes things better, ideally, but definitely something that's, I think, is fun and puts a little bit more of your personality out there than just your standard set of documentation. And yeah, so we talked a little bit, like I mentioned Loom in terms of like tooling that I use to help in my day to day. I also use Storybook a lot just because it is great with connecting our coded components, lots of customization, being able to define like the layout of our docs is really powerful, and being able to tailor it to how we want users to experience documentation for our components is really cool. Are there any like standout tooling that you want to call out for what you with on on a somewhat daily basis?
I usually keep my tooling lean, so it's definitely like Storybook. I think Storybook is a good place to have a document components, but it's like a sandbox for creating newer components. Next, I would say some sort of like static generator tool, so like Next.js, Gatsby, and whatnot. And I would say I'll add that because sometimes I want to be able to different ideas or concepts, and usually if there's not like a way to do that within the organization, I'll just quickly use Next.js because I feel like it's a good place to play around with components and build things and demonstrate ideas and whatnot. Figma is definitely another thing because in most cases, if I'm prototyping, especially if it's a component or some sort of like proof of concept, I use Figma first because it's just easy to do stuff. And usually, if you have your design system components in there, you can be able to do some sort of rapid prototyping really quickly. Yeah, and then besides that, I think those are the main tools I use. And then anything else is sometimes I use if I'm doing like animations or whatever like that, use Principle. But I try to mostly keep most of my stuff animation wise either in Figma or in encoded because it again I'm trying to get to the close to the end experience as possible. So
Hmm. Yeah, I recently got a new MacBook and I had to set up all my software that I use, and that was an experience. I'm lucky though, in this day and age, everything is saved on the cloud, so there wasn't too much of needing to back up anything if there was anything. But something that I really enjoyed doing was resetting up my terminal. I use iTerm 2, and every time I do this, I'm like, I'm gonna choose a new theme. I'm gonna really go all out. And I end up picking the same thing every single time. I follow my friend Andrew Lazowski, who actually works at Descript. Shout out to Andrew. He has an amazing terminal setup that he has posted, and so I love using that to just get started and have a really optimized terminal experience. And I have friends who go, why don't you just use GitHub Desktop? And don't take my terminal away from me. It's the only time I feel like a hacker. Yeah, I love my terminal. I have all the shortcuts, aliases. It's my secret weapon for productivity that I like to. It's not really, I don't want it to be a secret. I like to tell people, but it's definitely something that helps me be efficient, especially when swapping between repos and working on different projects and whatnot.
yeah, I use it on my ZSH
Yeah.
and
Oh, oh my
is it
ZSH.
some people say
Zish.
zilch and I was like I don't I just say it's weird but I'm like I'm just gonna say it because it makes sense but yeah that's it's been important too because I get tired of saying git commit or whatever like that so I have shortcuts for all that stuff and I have shortcuts for pretty much anything I do daily so if I need to edit like the ZSH
Zeesh.
Z config. I have a shortcut for that. If I need to like bootstrap a project real quickly, like a Next.js project, I have a command for that. So yeah, it's definitely one of those like more important tools. One day I'm gonna figure out how to like have all of my settings in like some sort of like GIS, and then I'll just type a simple command on my computer and it does all that stuff for me because I do that all the time and have to maintain different things. And I was like, I wish it was like in one place that like work computer, personal computer, I could just type a command and just do everything for me.
Sounds like a better use of time than just tinkering around with every setup possible, for sure. I wanted to talk about what kind of challenges we face as UX engineers. And starting off, I wanted to talk about like our levels. You have in design, you have product design, senior, staff, principal, and all these different types of levels. And also in engineering, you have these different tiers, and sometimes they match up, sometimes it's custom based on the team. And so with UX engineering, it's interesting because it's you, if you don't have your own career ladder for UX engineering, you're basing it off of design or engineering, and maybe you have strong design skills, but your engineering skills aren't like the same on that side of the house. Or sometimes your engineering skills are great and your design skills are like not. So I'm curious like what your thoughts are like when you're sitting in the middle, how do you evaluate what level you're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer I have is that usually the engineering ladder and the design ladder don't really match up for UX engineers because like you said there's different like skill sets. I'm a big believer that there's you could take a little bit of like the career growth from engineering and then just sprinkle in some of the design skills that will allow you to have a good clear ladder. And I would say the difference would be like once you're in the senior level, like senior UX engineer, you should be able to feel comfortable editing anything in code or in design. So one example might be like, oh, I'm building a component, and the designer who actually designed the component is out on vacation or like that. I should be comfortable, be able to figure out, all right, what are the specific states, and making sure that it looks clean and cohesive and whatnot. I mean, as you get like further up, like staff, I think it gets to a point where you're not only worrying about the stuff you're working on, but you're influencing other like product teams and whatnot. And then the higher you go up, the more you're talking about like high level strategies for the organization. And again, this has to think. You have to be able to think in it from both engineer perspective and a design perspective. And I think even right now, very few companies have like high level like principal or distinguished UX engineer because it's still technically a new field. But that's kind of my idea of leveling. I'm wondering, Kelly, from your perspective, what you think?
Yeah, I think one of the tricky parts of this is that the title is relatively new, but like the role and the need has been around for a while. For example, like technically I've only had this title for a couple of years, but I've been in this role for 10 plus years. And so that gets challenging of, well, on some roles I was more design heavy and some I was more dev heavy. And so when it comes to how many years of experience, it gets hazy. And so I like to focus more on outcomes instead of the years because I think that speaks more to your own personal journey than just a resume page. And so I focus on projects, I focus on my specific role in relation to the teamwork. And sometimes that can be a little, it's like a Venn diagram of the type of work. So let's say there's a new feature that needs to roll out. There's going to be some design work and there's going to be some code work. So in that scenario, there are a few possible things that can happen. Sometimes you get stuck with both roles because, hey, you can do both. You're just going to end to end deliver this entire experience. And that's one scenario I've seen play out. There's another experience where we have dedicated designers, we have dedicated engineers. We don't really need you on for this particular project, but then it's then why are you sure? Because I think I can help both sides here, but are you sure? So I think it to some teams it can get confusing with where do you fit in the team? Like for any given task do you think is like a team dynamic that needs to be explored?
Yeah, I think part of this role, uh, you have to be comfortable with like ambiguous projects and deadlines and processes and whatnot. And just speaking on experience, like again, I had the same points in my career where I was like more focused on design and then more focused on the engineering side. And the first thing I would say is it depends on the project. Like who are the people in this project? So is it more design focused or is it more engineer focused? I had a time where it was more design focused, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we want to do this and this, and yeah, it should be easy." And I was like, "It's not going to be easy because all the technical shoulds or whatever like that." And it works the same way if you're like part of an engineer team, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we should do this and all this stuff," and we're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Have you thought about it from more of the from the like user standpoint?" Because I think oftentimes like engineers get stuck on improving the actual coding aspect of it, but not really thinking it from the user standpoint. And I think that's one thing I would actually add to that ladder, where you should be able to talk to many people from different backgrounds or disciplines, because your job is just to be able to kind of be the liaison between the design and engineering disciplines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story when I was working on typography. I had a design document that had all of the values and it said point at the end. So 8 points, 12 points. I'm like, okay, like neat. Run a conversion, convert that to pixels, no problem. So we do that conversion, everything's fine. We throw it up on the screen and it doesn't match anything. And we're going, what happened? So I go back into the design document and I'm like, hey, can we talk about points? And I click on it and in the inspect panel it says pixels. And so it was a great learning opportunity to educate and inform that points are not synonymous with pixels. And then we adjusted the documentation and everything was fine. But it's just like one of those things where there are a lot of assumptions, a lot of, oh, this is the spec that got approved. We got to go code this now. And it takes that extra moment to step back and go, what are we actually like what's more important? The points, the units defined, or the actual visual that you're seeing on the screen? And so that was I thought that was like an interesting thing that I've seen on multiple teams. The whole point versus pixel versus SP versus DP for native platforms. I just want to get rid of all of it. I just want one standard. I just want a unit for typography that's the same across the board.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate because that happens a lot, especially with not only with typography but also with color, because people want to use different things and they're like, oh, RGBA and there's our HSL and there's all this stuff. We're like, oh, one is better than the other, and again, I think I always lean to what's gonna get to our goal quicker. And again, I'm thinking more in case of delivering and providing what's going to be providing value for the end users. And for me, I'm not very picky on it, and some people are very passionate about like this, but I'm like, I'm focusing on shipping stuff, and whatever works for the team right now, we can use that, and then again, we could reevaluate in the future. And I've strengthened my skills around like those like heated arguments, because I've been part of things where we've been talking about stuff for months and there's no conclusion. But I think that's kind of part of this like UXE role. It's just like be able to negotiate and just get things done at the end of the day.
Yeah, negotiation is definitely a very important skill to have for this type of role because you're just negotiating between design and engineering, you're negotiating between product management and engineering, like you're just in between lots of different circles. So from a career growth standpoint, how do you navigate these types of relationships and how do you like elevate your skills and grow more influence in these types of groups?
Yeah, so the best way to like navigate or showcase the role is just I do a lot of demonstrations. And what I was talking about earlier about prototyping, the reason why I prototyping because it allows people to experience the end experience without like it being in like the actual product or whatnot. I know early in my days it was like I'm gonna create this prototype, I'm gonna share it with not only like my team, but I could share it with the head of design, I could share it with the head of engineering, and they could be look at it and be like, okay, cool, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, and from the engineering side, they could think about, okay, if we're doing a lot of this, like this is going to be the layout. We have to think about all the API requests and like how it's going to work with the backend, blah blah blah. Literally, the prototype will be the center of everything, and it will start conversations. Because I realized that when I was just presenting like these static mockups or like that, people would be like, "Well, is that the right blue?" Or they were like, "Oh, is this like the right typography?" And I'm like, "That's not the whole point. Is like the actual experience." Because I'm like, I always had to explain it. I was like, this is just a wireframe, or this is like a proof of concept, but like people just didn't get it. I realized that like now I have to frame it into a story, and I'm like, hey, like we have a persona, blah blah blah, and then this is what they're trying to do. This is the solution. Again, is a proof of concept. What are your thoughts? And I was making sure that like ask specifically what the feedback I want to get, and from there they were like, "Oh, this is pretty neat," and they were like, "Oh, did you do this all yourself?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did it all myself, and this is what a UX engineer does." And they were like, "Oh, wow, okay, now I see the importance of the role." So I think that's the best way to do it, just showcase and showcase the benefits
Mhm.
because, again, it's a new role, and some people don't understand it. So you just have to be able to
Mhm.
showcase the value as much as possible, and just making sure you have all the stuff that you're able to accomplish and showcase it to not only your manager or your team, but also to the higher exec levels. And I'm fortunate because most of the companies I had to do this in, they're like smaller companies. But I'm wondering from your standpoint, Kelly, did you have
Mhm.
any other like strategies or tips for this?
Yeah, I love how you're talking about like showing your value through prototyping. That's great. For me, I focus on things like I'm big on community and I'm big on engagement with the community. And so a lot of the reward I see from being in this role is seeing people go, aha, that makes sense. Thank you. Like just seeing that click of, oh, I now understand the value of this thing you've just shown me about whether it's a new tool or I've highlighted a prop that may not have been widely known, or I helped with some kind of transition from like a legacy component to a new component. Just seeing people feel, oh, I'm finally unblocked, I think is really powerful. And getting that feedback in written form is even better. And so I try and record those types of moments. And so I have a list of all these times that I've helped people. And it's great to just look back on when I'm having not a great day. I just look at this, oh, people like me. They like what I do for the team. So I think just having that is really powerful because it's so many times we focus on numbers. We focus on adoption percentage, but we don't have a lot of more of that qualitative benefit of the role. So I think having that is plus NPS scores and other surveys that we can share out, I think creates a more holistic picture. And then I wanted to lastly touch on we talk about a lot of our work is mostly IC related, individual contributor, and we're the ones writing the code. We're the ones designing things out. There's a lot of contribution that we're providing. And when we're talking about career growth and what that means later on, I think for a lot of us, we're eventually known as the technical folks, the SMEs of how things are connected. And we don't really talk much about management. And I think the thing that I've found that has changed the most for me is not so much focusing on my own particular piece of the puzzle, but it's more on how can other people contribute their puzzle pieces. I regret this analogy, but we're trying to solve this giant jigsaw puzzle, and only a few of us have puzzle pieces. But I want more people to have puzzle pieces. So what that looks like for me is instead of writing the code myself or making the design, I'm focusing more on making sure the team's working on the right things, making sure that I'm unblocking folks, whether that's reviewing PRs, whether that's helping get alignment from another team, or having them be introduced to another team so that we can form good partnerships with those folks.
Yeah, and I think it's the management level is tricky for UX engineers because I believe that if you're going to be a good manager for UXEs, you have to be a UX engineer yourself. Because I had a lot of bad experience with managers that don't really understand what I do. And one story is that like I was working on the design system and whatnot, and I think that I was under design, and the design manager was like, "Oh, I can help out. I'll just learn Webpack tomorrow and be able to help you out." And I was like, "All right, let's see what happens." And sure. And then what happened was like he didn't. He was like, "Oh, this is too hard for me," so he didn't end up doing it. So I think being able to empathize for the role is super important. And I would say from like the IC level, the higher you go, you're gonna be doing a lot of mentorship because I've done in the past where I mentored folks from the design org and also folks from the engineering org, and I'm basically just teaching them the opposite skill. And I think be able to teach and share knowledge in a way where people feel empowered, and as a designer they can build their own prototypes in code, or as an engineer they're able to kind of design stuff without any designer's help resonates with me. I think with both the IC and manager route, you're basically accomplishing the same goal but in two different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, that's it. I think again, hopefully this is a good episode for folks that want to know what UX engineers do because I get that question a lot. So anytime that someone asks me that question, I'm just gonna shoot them this episode. So
Awesome. I like that we're already scaling up our efforts.
same, but yeah,
Alrighty,
have
that's all for now.
have a good one.